We're going to start this off with prayer, so if you would, please bow your heads. Our most kind and gracious and loving Heavenly Father, Lord, we just ask that you be with us today, Lord, to give us wisdom, and that the work that we do here will be pleasing unto you. We ask that you guide us in everything that we do, and Lord, that we will make the best decisions, not only for this state, but for this country. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. With that, we're going to go over the rules. If you will look, you will see the rules really hasn't changed since last year. There's one rule that I want to call attention to, and I want to make sure, especially for our new members, to understand, and that's number 3, and that is any resolution dedicating or naming any roadway, bridge, or interchange which would require funds for signage shall be paid for by the sponsors or group requesting the resolution to be adopted. You know, we feel like that if it's important enough that we end up dedicating a portion of a highway or bridge or whatever, that we should pay for it, and that should not be the state's responsibility. The only other change that from last year in the rules is number 11. And it's just all the officers. We had them down as ex officio members. We just made them all as members of the subcommittees. So with that, is there any discussion on the rules? I have a motion to pass. Have a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, with that, we're going to go over some, quote, ground rules for today. These chairs will be for members. We have more members than we actually have chairs, so if we get to the point that we have members of the committee that come in, I would ask any non-members to sit out in the public and give them the ability to sit up here. Non-members, if you end up sitting up here for the lack of chairs, you will not have the ability today to ask questions. Questions will be reserved to members of the committee. With that being said, I'm going to turn over the committee now to Chairman Burns, who chaired our subcommittee, and I will come down front to present the bill. Chairman Burns.
Mr. Chairman, you want one of these waters? Yes, sir. You let anybody drive your car, won't you?
I thought we were talking about the front.
Well, that too. Good feed. That was an old second baseman. That was perfect.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the compliment. I don't get many of those.
Neither do I, lady.
Thank you, members, for being here, and thank you to all of you in the audience for in attendance as we continue the discussion on a most important matter to the people of our state. Again, we appreciate each and every one of you being here. We appreciate the chairman's work on this bill, and at this time, I think he's pretty much gotten it down. He's presented it a couple of times, so we'll give him one more of those opportunities this time. We'll be working on LC 344491S. Should be in your folder. Substitute to House Bill 170. Mr. Chairman, the floor is yours.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. I'm proud to bring forth today another sub. To those of you who were on the subcommittee, you saw a numerous different subs as we worked it through the subcommittee. Today, really the only difference in the changes in the sub from the subcommittee was that if you'll go over, and I'll go through the bill, but I'm going to tell you that one of the changes now on line 83 we actually inadvertently left out propane. Propane actually powers vehicles here in the state of Georgia, and so we went back and added them in there, and because they actually do pay a conversion rate on motor fuel tax. With that, to those of you who were not on the subcommittee, I'm going to go back through the bill, and to those of you who were on the subcommittee, I'm sorry that you're going to have to continue to sit through this again. But I will try to be as quick as possible as we go through. The first is part 2, is the alternative fuel definitions, and that's where you see where we define the alternative fuel. And I'll kind of go slow to let you kind of catch up as we go through. Section 2.2 is this fee schedule where you see for the alternative fuel vehicles. 87, that's adjusted according to the Highway Construction Cost Index, so that will be indexed. Section 3, starting on line 94. The governor currently today has the ability to suspend. Most all of you know that every 6 months we adjust the price of a gallon of gas according to the average price over that 6-month period. There is one exception to that. If prices move up or down within 25%, then it's adjusted in between that 6-month period, which actually is taking place right now as we speak. The governor had the ability within that to suspend those, increase or decrease. As we move to an excise tax, that power basically goes away. What we're trying to do here in Section 3-1 is to give the governor the ability, in the event that there is an emergency, and God forbid, Representative Bryant, we have a hurricane that hits over there on the coast in your area, or even back in Louisiana like with Katrina, and gas prices go to soaring because of that natural disaster, that he or she could then go in and declare a state of emergency, freeze that index, and then at that point the 2/3 of the General Assembly would go in and ratify that. So that's where that section's coming from. Section 4-1 is where we remove the a tax credit for electric vehicles. That's going to get us somewhere in the range of about, currently that exemption there cost us about $45 million, give or take. It depends on that year. Section 4.2 removes the prepaid state tax definition. Section 4.3 or 4-3 removes the motor fuels from the state sales tax. And if you see a lot of this, it's where we're actually removing it from the sales tax portion, converting it over to which would be an excise. So as we move through, basically that's what you continue to see until Section 4-7, and that's where we talk about the lost running out to year 2020. We moved it out to 2020 because lost is adjusted according to the census. It's when the next census is taken, and that gives another 5 years roughly for them to plan for that. Host is in 4-8 does the same thing. 4-9 is where SPLOST runs through the expiration, and then after that the reauthorization, as we get on in the bill, talks about where they can go back in and reauthorize. They just can't charge it on motor fuel. eSPLOST goes through expiration, same thing. 4-11 is the most through expiration. And 4-12 is where we get into where we convert to the excise, and you can see there's 29.2 on gas, 33 on diesel, which is supposedly the equivalent between the two. And you see within there the formula for the indexing. We're going to go according to CAFE standards and National Highway Construction Cost. Then, you know, on 345, let me just say this. I've had a couple people say, is that giving Delta another exemption? No, that is not. That just is because aviation is not considered motor fuel, and that's why that's stricken. I wanted to make sure that we state that so that anybody that has any kind of questions as to whether that's giving Delta a tax credit, the answer to that is absolutely no. 4-13, we repealed the second motor fuel tax. Part 2 of that section on line 442, you'll see 48-9-21 is actually where we define the term transportation purposes for the local standpoint. I'll read that. Transportation purposes means and includes roads, bridges, public transit, rails, airports, buses, seaports, including without limitation road, street, and bridge purposes pursuant to paragraph 1 of the code section, and all accompanying infrastructure and services necessary to provide access to these transportation facilities, including the general obligation debt, revenue debt, and other multi-year obligations issued to finance such purposes. That last part there was put in for Chairman Hamilton, and I think he had to be in another meeting. What Forsyth has went in, they passed a local referendum creating bonds so that they could go on and push through a project that they so desperately needed and was important to them, that was voted on by the taxpayers and approved. We wanted to make sure that with this definition they could use that local excise tax if they so choose to pay off those debt. The 48-9-22 is where we authorize the local provisions for the local excise tax for them to go in and levy that. Let's see. We go to a 6-cent combined. Let's look at line 479. That's where we set the 6-cent max. And then starting in 481, the local excise tax indexed the same way. 496, starting on that line, is where we set forth that those proceeds have to be used for transportation purposes. Line 519 starts where it's the local money. Now, the local money raised is distributed back within that same county according to the LMIG formula that's currently in place today. That's the way that we as a state currently send back local dollars down to our cities and county governments, is based off of the LMIG formula. The LMIG formula right now is set according to population, lane miles, both paved and unpaved. We believe that that is the easiest way to do it. That gives the same distribution we use at the state for them locally. And I read today where there was a specific organization that wanted to take unpaved out of it, which is concerning to me because of the fact that a lot of our rural communities and outside the cities have a lot of unpaved miles. And I know that some have said, well, why should that be distributed back according to those miles of dirt road? Well, if you come down to South Georgia in my district and other districts around the state, not only in South Georgia, you get big rains. And when those roads washes, it costs locals a lot of money to have to go in there and repair those roads. So that's why we have unpaved in there. And I believe that we made that statement back when we passed that formula. And I believe that we need to make sure that we continue to leave it in there. So I was a little disturbed about seeing that in there. Part 5 is where we talk about the infrastructure bank and the language there. I think the infrastructure bank, or the transportation infrastructure bank, is a great program that we have here in the state of Georgia. I think that it is one that we can continue to utilize. In fact, I think we underutilize it. And I want to see us go in and recapitalize that and add some more money. Chairman Hamilton has an amendment that we will consider on that, and I don't have any problems with his amendment concerning that language there. With that, that is a very, very quick synopsis of a piece of legislation that I know is very complicated, but I would hope that most of you have already heard the presentation, or at least looked at it and studied it before today, before we got in here. I know you've heard a lot about it from a lot of your local governments. This bill right now, as it stands, will make 157 counties whole in the state of Georgia, which I think is a pretty big accomplishment that we've gotten to that point. Now, with that being said, this is still a process. We're still considering any and all ideas. We're still working with individuals. I've met with a lot of individuals from not only within our caucus, but other individuals from local governments, trying to figure out a way to continue to improve this piece of legislation. I've had a lot of concerns about schools within here, and we're trying to get there. We're trying to find a way. We've got a constitutional issue that we're trying to address, and we're trying to figure out if there's a way that we can solve that. I will say this. We are, in this piece of legislation, fundamentally saying in the state of Georgia, as we move forward, as we move to an excise tax, and most all of you know, we have basically 5 different taxes on motor fuel in the state of Georgia currently. We have an excise tax. We have a sales tax, a 3%. We have another 1% on top of that, which we refer to as the 4th percent or 4th penny. And then we have the locals, and then we have the federals, the feds that come in. So we have 5 different taxes currently today on motor fuel. We're trying to streamline that. We're going to move to a straight excise tax. We believe that that's sustainability. We believe that it is more predictable, and we believe that it is the best method as we move forward. Too many times in Georgia, we are collecting revenue off of motor fuel that is not going to transportation. And I, for one, firmly believe that if you collect revenue on motor fuel, you should spend it on transportation. And we haven't done that at the state. We've had the 4th penny, or the 4th percent. It's really the percent, but we like to call it the 4th penny, that we've put in our general fund and spent it wherever. With this bill, by moving to an excise tax, that 4th percent or 4th penny now moves to transportation. And so we at the state are stepping up, doing what we believe should be done, and we're asking our locals to look at doing the same. And we're trying to make them whole. That 6-cent excise that we allow them to go back and put on at a local level has to be used for transportation purposes. And other than that, on the SPLOS, and you can name them all, they can't charge them on motor fuel once they run out. They can still reauthorize them. And I've even had some people say, well, you're completely taking away the abilities for the local to pass a SPLOS or an e-SPLOS. That's not true. This bill does not take away that ability. It just says that when you go back in and you reauthorize, you cannot charge it on motor fuel. So in other words, let's use eSplosh from a standpoint. You just figure that whatever that revenue that you generate off of motor fuel, when you're figuring your next eSplosh, you just don't figure it in to your capital projects that you're looking at building. Now there again, we're still trying to work on, from an eSplosh standpoint, on how we get there, and hopefully we'll be able to get there as we move forward through this. But basically, Mr. Chairman, that is the bill. I do appreciate each and every one of you here. I know y'all are probably as tired of hearing about this piece of legislation as I am. But hopefully we will continue to work through it. I would be remiss, Mr. Chairman, if I didn't say that I want to thank you, the Dean of our House, who is here today, Chairman Hamilton and Chairman England, for touring around the state of Georgia this past summer. We went to 8 different locations, and we listened to the people to hear how they wanted us to look at solving our transportation issues. It took a lot of time away from your families, and it took a lot of commitment from you away from your jobs and all, and I appreciate every effort that you made and put forth. With that, Mr. Chairman, if there are any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them, or if you want to try to move on to testimony, and then after that I'd come back and answer questions, which may be the best way to go, I will do so. It's up to you.
We're going to have a couple of questions, I think, and clarify a couple of issues. Somebody on this end's got a dinger going off, and I ain't got many nerves left, but that one's about on my last one. If y'all will cut that thing off down there. Please. I'm doing my best to concentrate. Yeah. Oh, you can. I could hear it. Chairman Roberts, I did have one question. If you'd clarify, and many of these members here are certainly very educated on transportation issues and on this bill. There's a part of the bill, I think, where switching to excise taxes, which an excise tax helps us capture some funds that we're today not able to capture with the sales tax. Would you bring us up to speed on that, if you don't mind?
You're referring to the Georgia Motor Truckers Association. I think they're here today to testify as well. They get credits off of excise tax, but they do not get credits off of sales tax. So by converting to that, and that delta is really kind of unknown, but we've been given the figure of about $60 million that we will collect off of that, and that's from additional sales of motor fuel for our truckers in the state of Georgia. And so we hopefully will collect around 60. It could be higher, it could be under, but that's a delta that we're still will have to figure in as we move forward. But that will help us to recoup some of those that are actually coming through the state that would now purchase diesel in the state of Georgia versus waiting until they get to other states.
Thank you. And members, today we will be having, this is for hearing purposes only. We will not vote on the bill today. And we will, if you have to offer any constructive ideas as for in the form of amendments or anything, we can hear those amendments today, but we will not vote on the amendments today either. That's not in the process and not the correct posture. So at this time, we're going to take a couple of questions, constructive questions that members need to clarify, and then we're going to go on to some other portions, Mr. Chairman, and sure. Thanks for your presentation. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, as we talked earlier today, I think that from a personal standpoint and from most people that I've talked to, there's total agreement that something has to be done. Sure. And some of us are looking a lot harder to find ways to be 100% behind this bill sure. than to be against it. Sure. And I can truthfully speak, I don't take orders from Washington. My orders come out of Midway and Hinesville. And that's the only place I get orders from. So the emails from Washington have no effect on me. As a matter of fact, they give me a stronger resolve. I'm looking how there's a couple of things that you said that I think goes a long ways, but it needs to be clarified crystal clear, because I've noticed a whole lot less pressure in the pipes than there was even at the end of our subcommittee hearings. But you made the statement several times on being able to make counties whole. I think I know what you're talking about, but I think that needs to be crystal clear.
Sure.
Because the folk that there are three entities here that we're listening to back home. We're listening to our boards of education, our cities, and our counties. And I know there's no such thing as a perfect piece of legislation. But we need to get as close as we can to being perfect. But would you expound upon making counties whole a little bit more?
Sure. Let me also say that I agree with you about emails from Washington. I know who you're referring to, and I'm worried about Georgia and Georgia residents. When that group and that organization can straighten out Washington,
Then come see us.
and they decide they want to move to Georgia, then we may listen to them. But I don't. I'm like you. I could care less what somebody in Washington D.C. has to say. So I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. In fact, I'm glad you even brought that up. From the standpoint of counties, it's my understanding, and I think that probably their organization will be here today to testify. The numbers that I have got back, by the time that you allow these local SPLOST to go off, you give the 6 cent locally excise tax there, and then we distribute back according to the LMIG formula. And that's money that, again, that's raised in that county, goes back to that county. I've heard some comments, well, the state shouldn't be collecting it. Well, the state currently collects local SPLOST and all and then remits it back. So that's what we're doing there. And when you figure that going back and what that revenue generates, plus the fact we're looking at putting more money into LMIG from the state that goes back to the local governments, that's where we get to the point to where we're making them whole. Now, I'm still willing to listen, and I'm still looking at avenues to try to help cities and school boards. We'll never have a perfect bill, as you said. We can never make everybody whole. And I think that's the issue that we're trying to get to. But that somewhat is how we get back to making them whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, my friend. I got a technical question, and I just want clarification on line 124. Any new low emission vehicle, is low emission something that we have defined in code?
It's already that's where we got it defined right now when it gets to tax credit.
But there's a definition for that somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. And you said something that kind of struck me, and I want to just wrap my mind around it, and if I'm wrong, please let me know. As I understand it, any school system, any city, any county currently that's got any kind of SPLOST lost, what it is going to remain until that expires.
Correct.
And then, I mean, and I know your wife's a teacher, and I know you're passionate for education. But then if school system A, the only thing they're going to lose would be the amount of money that was on top of that motor fuel. And they simply wouldn't build their list of what they want to approve the projects by. If they were getting $2 million and the motor fuel amounted for $200,000, then all they do is make their new SPLOST list or eSPLOST list to be $1.8 million. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And any system that had asked us in the past that they really favored the availability of no longer doing capital projects, but instead wanted to do it for operations and maintenance, as we've had that issue before us before, then any of those, this wouldn't have any effect. If they've wanted that in the past, this would have no effect on their ability to be able to have a capital project, because they were looking not to have to do that anyway.
Correct.
Thank you.
And the fact, I think we also need to remember, all of us, that we're never guaranteed another e-splost or splost, that's up to the voters. And generally speaking, most of them pass. And I will say that. But I do believe that as we move forward into the future, that there's a lot more scrutiny going to be paid to them.
More follow-up, if I may. Last year, if memory serves me correctly, there was an issue that became before the House as it relates to a fractional SPLOST. So any organization, city, county, school board that had that kind of support in the past would have the mindset, you would think, that they necessarily wouldn't have to have everything that they currently have now if they wanted to cut it in half to have better projects that they wanted last year.
That's correct.
So, thank you.
Representative Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Roberts, thank you for the work you've done on this. I know there's a lot of people want to speak, so I have 3 questions real quick. On the commercial fee for commercial vehicles on LP natural gas, how did we get to the $300 fee, and was there any consideration based on gross vehicle weight? Been in the freight and cargo business and owning a trash company, I'm just curious as how do we get to $300? And working for a freight delivery company, that our trucks may not be, but you know, 1,000-pound payload versus a trash truck that would have 12,000 pounds.
Sure. That's a good question. We actually during the summer I had to go to Washington, unfortunately, twice, and speak to groups up there, and I also had the opportunity to meet with several groups or other legislators or industry leaders from around the country, and really just trying to look at other states and what they do and what they have done is where we kind of backed into that number. We looked at it from passenger vehicle and then kind of backed into the commercial side of it as well. That number was a number that come out of the study committee as well as we sat down and evaluated and looked at everything. So that's kind of how we backed into that number.
Okay. And just clarify, I know you just touched on the LMIG formula, but in Henry County, if we raise $100 million off the 6 cents, $100 million is going back to Henry County, and it will be divided by that LMIG formula.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. And then, do we have anything in place that would, if this formula, this plan was in place in 2014, based on the gallons that were sold in the state of Georgia, do we have anything that would show what this would have generated last year?
Last year, there was about 520 to, it depends on the numbers you look at, but roughly $520 million is about what was collected off of motor fuel by local governments in the state of Georgia. That number this year will be less. Gas prices have gone down, and so because of that money will be less this year than it was last year. Not quite sure where they'll be. I've heard estimates between 300 and 350 million is where it'll be this year. So it'll be substantially less this year than it was last year. Now, when these local SPLOST roll off and that 6 cent goes into effect, we'll have to see what it will be at that time. It could be back up to the $500 million range, but that's a number. It's funny because when you look at the 29.2 cent per gallon, we have actually, as a state, paid more per gallon back several years ago than the 29.2. And if you look back, you'll see where that local motor fuel tax, or I shouldn't say local, but from the state standpoint, motor fuel tax was actually up there around where we're at right now, sometimes even higher.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, being from a area which passed the T-Splosh, can you sort of articulate to us, as written now, how this bill will affect us?
Sure. One is, as you well know, in those areas that pass T-Splosh, there is not that sales tax, that 1% is not charged on motor fuel. So it from my opinion, it does not affect them any differently than any other county in the state of Georgia. They will all be treated the same. If we had decided to do a 1 cent statewide sales tax, then those three regions would have definitely been exempted out of that. But because we are just going to converting to an excise tax, and as we're just talking about motor fuel, I don't see that it negatively impacts them.
That's all the questions for now. So I think at this point we'll move forward, and we're going to ask the department, Josh Waller, who's their public relations person, public liaison, and make some comments. Now we have a sign-up sheet. After Josh finishes, we're going to move into a public comment phase, so we want to give as many people as we can an opportunity to have a comment. If you would like to speak, there's a sign-up sheet out there. We have it. If you have not signed up, we'll get you back, give you an opportunity to sign up. We'll kind of judge on how much time we're going to have, depending on how many folks we have sign up. So, Josh, at this time, we'll be glad to hear from you.
I'm going to stick to the 5 minutes. And I've got some kind folks in the audience who agreed to throw stuff at me if I go over 5. So hold them to that. This is basically just a quick overview what the commissioner provided to the subcommittee last week, or I guess earlier this week. So we'll start turning to page 2. You can see sort of the state of our current funds. We have talked about in the past the department's 55% funded with federal funds. Our capital program is actually a higher percentage of federal funds. Right now, because the feds have not fully funded FY15, we are staring down the fact that we are $434 million short of what we would normally have for the fiscal year program. What that effectively has meant that the lettings that we would have had in January, February, March, April are on hold. Right now, Washington and Congress has identified May for a target date to resolve this, but for us it has meant that the lettings have practically come to a standstill during critical months that we'd be gearing up lettings for projects that would start in the spring, early summer. So that's certainly something that we're monitoring. It just shows sort of the challenges we face being as dependent as we are on federal funds for our capital program. On the next slide, what you can see looks very similar to the other, but this may give you a sense of what it could look like moving forward should the federal government decide that they are no longer going to backfill the Federal Highway Trust Fund with general funds. Right now, the federal gasoline tax is not keeping pace with the outlays necessary to maintain level funding. So should they decide that they no longer are just simply going to appropriate to states that amount which is collected by the gas tax, you would see this situation every single year. So we would have to rebalance, reduce the number of projects that we would have based off this if this were to become a reality. The next slide is to give you a sense of sort of the effects of inflation. You can see back in 1971 that $1 million would have allowed you to pave 64 miles on a 2-lane rural highway. In 2011, that went to 6.67 miles. Just to give you some sense about the effects of time and the ability to effectively deliver and the amount that you can deliver for a given amount of price. Next slide is sort of a summation slide. The commissioner walked through, and I'll walk through briefly each of these sections, but to give you a sense of sort of the unfunded need. You look there at the bottom, the total is between 2.1 and 2.5, and what I'll do is I'll walk through quickly the different sections and explain what is the justification for each number. The next slide you'll see for roadway maintenance, identified need of an additional $128 million. If you would just turn to the next slide after that, you can see 2 roads. The one on the right is a poor road, rated poor. The one on the left is fair. Obviously, our goal is to maintain the highest percentage possible of fair or better. Fair is not 100% fantastic, but it's much more passable and acceptable for purposes of drivers. Obviously, we want to have it in good condition, but fair is that level, that key point we try and maintain. So as you look to the next slide, you'll see the degradation curve at the current funding level of $100 million. It shows you where we're going. Obviously, a place we don't want to go in terms of the percentage of bad and poor roads. At the next slide, it's the degradation curve and shows you the improvement with the additional funds. This is to give you a sense of the impact of that additional funding when you're looking at resurfacing and maintaining your pavements. Let me take just a quick second to I know especially in some of the budget hearings, we have 3 sort of categories. You've got routine maintenance, capital maintenance, and capital construction. Routine maintenance, which the commissioners use this phrase, is like if you've got your roof and you're just doing patching on the roof. That's routine maintenance. Capital maintenance is replacing the roof. And capital construction would be adding an addition to the house with the new section of roof on it. So that's, when we talk about and use those different terms, that's the distinction between routine, capital, and capital construction. Next slide is dealing with the bridge replacements. If you look there, we have 8,004 locally owned bridges and culverts, and then you have 6,671 state-owned bridges and culverts. And obviously you see those two pictures. That's a bridge from the surface, and then that's the bridge underneath. So obviously there's more than just the pavement surface of the bridge. There are other issues that have to be maintained to ensure the bridge stands up. So you can see on the next slide, in order to maintain the bridges at the level we want, which deals with a 75-year replacement cycle, required an additional $456 million a year in addition to what we're currently doing for bridge maintenance. As you can see on the next slide, it just goes into the detail about that.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Absolutely.
I know there's been some questions. I've had some questions, and on this particular slide where you just talked about bridges and additional funds needing $456 million, I've actually had some people say, is there a way, or is GDOT going to be able to spend $200 million more a year on bridges, or if we give them $200 million, are they only going to be able to spend $100 or $150? Address that, please.
To the question, if you had an immediate infusion of $200 million or some amount, we actually have a backlog and have already identified lists of critical bridges that we would begin with. So that's one of those areas where, while we try and prioritize, we certainly have a backlog that we would address. And you also have many options when it comes to procurement in terms of design, build, and other ways that can help you get projects out the door a lot faster than your typical design, bid, build.
Josh, I hate to interrupt you, but we have a pertinent question on the bridge portion here. So, Chairman Setzler.
Let's just go keep it quick. Thank you. This isn't done in the spirit of sharpshooting the bridge information, but I do know when you look at what's classified as being functionally obsolescent and bridges that are in need of have condition issues, I think if you look at that critically, you look at specific bridges, for example, in my part of Cobb County, I looked at them. Some have condition indexes of 3, 4, 15, 16. Those are bridges that are in real need. I think across the members, there's a real skepticism about bridges with a condition index of 71 of needing to be replaced. I think there's concerns on the functional obsolescence. There's a bridge that was built on a 4-lane road with the county splossed. They just took the cones off of it 2 years ago. It's a 4-lane bridge on Giles Road in Cobb County crossing the CSX rail line. It's on my list as being functionally obsolescent. It was just delivered 3 years ago. I just think there's a real skepticism about those numbers. It's not pointed at the chairman or anything. I think members are really looking for a sanity-checked, real need number. And just in the spirit of helping you with that, I think that's something that the department could be very helpful in clarifying.
Understood. And you're right to the sense about a bridge being functionally obsolete. There's definitely a spectrum, because what it basically means is if you were designing that bridge today, you would not design it to that spec. And there's a spectrum of it's still perfectly fine, but there are some structural issues that you most definitely want to make sure you replace. This number is geared towards ensuring that you have a 75-year life cycle to the bridges. That's what that number is pegged to.
I hear that. Just having done some condition assessment work in my other life, I think folks are listening. I think there's a real interest in fixing bridges that are truly functionally obsolescent or crumbling or dangerous. I just don't think folks are. I think when you put some of the numbers in front of them that they're seeing, I think it undermines the credibility of the total ask when they see some bridges and some things in there that maybe aren't the same level of intensity. So I share that with you in the spirit of cooperation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Josh.
All right, next slide is just the general capital project needs list. As you can see there, you have the total unfunded capital needs at about $1 billion. And then below it, you have the managed lane system, which is in a range depending on what type of projects were to be delivered. We had the managed lane system plan. It's currently being updated to the implementation plan, looking at some of the critical metro area managed lanes to help relieve congestion. So I'm going to walk through just very briefly the maps of each of them to give you a sense about what these different project types are. The next slide is the managed lane implementation for congestion relief in the metropolitan area. The slide after that is the freight map, which has been approved. Obviously, we're looking at tackling congestion in the metropolitan area, but we're also looking at the movement of freight statewide. Obviously, those are critical corridors, and so that's another priority of the state. The next slide is the GRIP program, which everyone's familiar with, the GRIP roads, which tie pretty closely, but not 100% with the freight corridor network, but obviously critical economic corridors to ensure access throughout the state, and particularly to the port as we look at the expansion to ensure that wherever you are in the state, you have equal grounding to be able to compete with, to locate businesses and be able to hopefully get your goods throughout the country and internationally. So next is obviously, the next slide is traffic operations. The recommended amount of $35 million in addition. Obviously, operations, ensuring safety, ensuring optimal traffic optimization, light synchronization, those things that help us take the asset we have currently and make it work better from an operational standpoint, and obviously making sure that we reduce the number of Georgians who lose their life on our roads, which you can see on the next slide is that continued reduction, which is a key priority, the highest priority of the department, is to make sure that more people go home at the end of the day. Next slide is the intermodal needs, identified at $221 million additionally. What that basically approximates what would be required. Now, we don't have, through our budget, we don't have interaction with MARTA or Greta, so that's sort of a different line item, but this is for those intermodal transit airport aid aspects that are through the department. That number ensures that we are maximizing the match that we're able to receive federally on the transit and airport aid side. Also on the airport aid side, there are certain critical airfield projects that are not federally eligible, whether it's a runway resurfacing or that type project, that would ensure that we can help address some of the backlog. Next slide is routine maintenance. Basically, we're identifying the additional needs there for an additional $200 million. And then if you look on the next slide, it sort of breaks down those activities that are within the routine maintenance category. So, then just briefly moving to the next slide, you looks at the tier regions, because we had a lot of questions about that, and I think the chairman's addressed some of that, about what does the TIA tax or T-SPLOST tax levied on. There's the exemptions on that next page. And then the page after that is just demonstrating the fact that the tier regions, the three regions that passed, had an unconstrained list of a lot more projects and a higher dollar amount that had to be constrained down. So while it's obviously meeting some critical projects, particularly for the regions, there still are a lot of unfunded needs in those regions. And with that, I would conclude. Hopefully I didn't go too far over the 5 minutes.
You did pretty good on that, Josh. Congratulations. Any questions for the department? We've had a couple of questions. We have some other speakers, so if you have a question, we'll entertain it. If not, we'll appreciate Josh being here and bringing the information. Thank you, sir. Thank you. There are a couple of members that have come in. I will be glad to entertain y'all a seat. The room's full. If you're a member of the committee, we'll be glad. If you're not, you're still welcome to sit. And if you're not a member of the committee, we'll ask you to do just that. You'll participate by being here. And we'll allow members to participate. And I don't think we're going to have a problem with other members coming in, but we'll certainly bump you out if if the members of the committee come in, need to be seated. We're glad to have both of you. We're moving it now into some comments, and I think let's try to go about 5 minutes, and we'll work with you a little under or a little over. Under would be most appreciated. We'll start with Greg Wright. Greg, are you here? Okay, Greg, if you'll come up, we'll hear from you, and you can tell us who you are and who you're with. On deck will be Michael Sullivan.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Greg Wright. I'm president of the Coweta County Development Authority. I'm here today representing the Georgia Economic Developers Association. I serve as the first vice chairman of the organization. GEDA is a statewide association of economic development practitioners and volunteers from throughout the state of Georgia, all committed to quality economic development throughout Georgia. My purpose for appearing today is to thank you for focusing much-needed attention on the transportation needs of our state. We know that the committee has devoted a great deal of time to this issue and finding a workable solution to our funding needs. Economic development is dependent upon having quality transportation systems in place. We understand that the transportation needs are different depending on what part of the state you're from. However, it's clear that action must be taken to help ensure that our transportation systems remain viable and meet the needs of a growing Georgia population. Each year, our Area Development Magazine surveys site location consultants and corporate decision makers to determine the key factors they use when determining where they locate new facilities and where they expand existing facilities. Year after year, highway accessibility ranks as one of the top factors. The magazine noted that transportation will remain a top factor as many companies implement just-in-time supply chains and as companies consolidate their warehousing and distribution facilities. For our communities that are not on an interstate, it is even more important that they have access to a reliable transportation system to help sell their communities to prospects. Another critical factor is workforce. Companies need to know that our state and our communities can supply the quality and the quantity of employees that they need to be successful. Therefore, the ability of these valuable employees to get to and from their jobs also weighs heavily in the decision-making process. Finally, economic development touches all parts of the state, from Metro Atlanta to our most rural communities. However, the need to adequate funding to support quality transportation projects is common to all areas of the state. When companies are evaluating our state, they are looking toward the future. They want to locate in states and communities that give them a level of comfort about the present and about the future. Having a long-range transportation plan is critical in helping us do our jobs to encourage more companies to make long-term investments in the state of Georgia. We know that you have a difficult job ahead of you. GEDA supports the effort to address this vital issue, and we support the efforts of our legislators to work together to find a workable solution to Georgia's transportation funding needs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. We appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Michael Sullivan. I'm the president and CEO of the American Council of Engineering Companies of Georgia. I'm also the chairman of the Georgia Transportation Alliance, which is the Georgia Chamber of Commerce's transportation advocacy and public policy arm. And it's been an honor to serve in that role and to be a part of this study committee effort. I was actually honored to be able to sit on the committee for 6 of the 8 study committee meetings as Chairman Roberts and Chairman Gooch took us around the state to every corner of the state, and it was quite an educational experience. And it was, I think, one of the best parts of that was being able to see Chairman Roberts up close and personal as he led that effort, co-led that effort. And I'm not trying to butter you up, Chairman Roberts, but I think the chairman is a great example of real leadership. This is not an easy issue to tackle. That was not an easy process to undergo, as the chairman indicated. There were a lot of folks took a lot of time out of their lives and away from their businesses, and a lot of you folks sitting here did that as well, to really grapple with this issue and not just deal with it at a superficial level. You got a lot of folks down here that are happy to just kind of see which way the wind is blowing or decide what their position is. You got a lot of other folks down here who think that they have the answer and that they have the only answer. Chairman Roberts has not done either one of those things. What Chairman Roberts has done and what I think this bill represents is an honest effort to really try to listen to what the folks around the state said and to listen what the folks in the General Assembly have said and to address their concerns and to synthesize those concerns. And I would go so far as to say I think he's done a masterful job with HB 170 in trying to take a diversity of opinions. Because let's be honest, there's 180 members in the House, there's 56 senators, there's maybe twice as many as that number of opinions out there on how best to address this issue. And I think this HB 170 has done a really good job of addressing some of the concerns that have been expressed. One of the concerns that was expressed was that motor fuel taxes should be spent on transportation. This bill accomplishes that goal. Another one is that as our revenues have increased as a state, that the general fund of the state should have a role in addressing transportation needs. And, of course, by moving the fourth penny into an excise tax, that has a direct impact on the general fund. So those two points I think are important and have been definitely synthesized in this. And, of course, we're dealing with multiple versions of this bill, and each bill version that has been promulgated as a result of trying to address the legitimate concerns that have been brought forward. So we just want to thank Chairman Roberts for his leadership, thank him for the process that he's gone through. Now, I'll say that. Is this a perfect bill? This is not a perfect bill. We all, I hope, know there's no such thing as a perfect bill. My definition and your definition of a perfect bill are probably going to be different. There is no such thing as a perfect bill. And I think after two subcommittee hearings and this committee hearing, we've spent a lot of time dealing with the granular level of this bill, what each particular section does and how it interplays with the other sections. That maybe we've spent a lot of time looking at the forest, and it might be a good idea to back up. I mean, we've spent a lot of time looking at the trees. It might be a good idea to back up and look at the forest. Why are we here? Why are we engaging in this process? Transportation is one of the critical problems that this state faces. Even the harshest critics of this bill will agree on that, that this is a problem that the state of Georgia has and that it's time to do something about it. Now, I'll say critics, not those critics from Washington, D.C. that send y'all emails trying to get people angry about an issue and hoping that those folks will actually send them a check. You don't have to worry about those critics. But critics of this bill who are actually trying to solve the problem will agree on that. And on a word on critics, I would suggest that one of the mistakes that you don't want to make in this process is fighting the last war. This is not 2012. This is 2015. And traveling around the state and hearing from everybody, and I've been to a lot of meetings with a lot of Tea Party leaders in a lot of different parts of this state over the past few months. This is not 2012 when the response was no. The response now is a legitimate response of acknowledging that there is a problem and acknowledging that this problem needs a solution. And there are folks that I think are very willing to engage in that discussion and in that process. So I would encourage you not to assume that your constituents are in the same frame of mind as they were in 2012. Part of that could be because of 2012. Some of those people were promised a plan B if they just voted against the TIA that now 3 years later has never come. And they voted against the TIA acknowledging that there was a problem that needed a solution. They just maybe weren't in favor of that solution. Now they're very hungry for a solution, and I think HB 170 is the right one. This is a fundamental role of government. It's always been since the very beginning of our republic at the federal level and at the state level. But transportation is not really what we're talking about. Transportation is just a means to an end. What we're really talking about is jobs. Transportation is literally the circulatory system for our economy in this state. It's about making sure that the investments that we've made as a state in the Port of Savannah aren't wasted because of connectivity problems that freight can't get in and out of that port or get from our manufacturers and our agricultural interests. It's about making sure that Georgia-grown and manufactured products can get to market. It's about rural communities' ability to attract and retain jobs and to connect to the interstate system. It's about safe and predictable commute times, employees being able to get from point A to point B in a safe and reasonable time, access to our greatest economic engine, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta Airport, and the ability for folks to get on a plane at Hartsfield and get to almost any other economic capital in the world, most of the time with a direct flight. It's about quality of life. It's about employers being able to attract their employees because we have a quality of life here that folks are willing to live here and come here and work here. Not desiring to be somewhere else. Speaker and Lieutenant Governor and the Governor have all said doing nothing is not an option. I don't believe that this committee is interested in doing nothing. I don't believe that the House is interested in doing nothing. I just want you to know on behalf of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the Georgia Transportation Alliance, and the American Council of Engineering Companies of Georgia, we support you in this effort. We encourage you in this effort. If we can be a resource to you, we want to be a resource to you. But again, thank you for your leadership on this issue. Thank you for doing the hard work of solving this very critical problem for Georgia's economy and Georgia's future. Thank you. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Michael. We appreciate your service on the committee and your time here. If Mr. Tim Lowe, I apologize, I didn't give you a heads up. And after Mr. Lowe will be Andy Lord. I want to recognize the former Senate Transportation Chairman, Chairman Gooch, who's in attendance. We appreciate you being here and appreciate your work this summer on the committee, on the study committee. Mr. Lord.
Chairman Roberts.
Mr. Lowe, excuse me, I'm sorry.
The committee. My name is Tim Lowe, and I currently serve as the chairman of the Council of Quality Growth. We appreciate also the hard work and dedication you all have shown in working to find a solution to our transportation funding issue in this state, and thank you for allowing us to comment on House Bill 170. The Council of Quality Growth is a 30-year-old trade organization with over 250 members representing thousands of employees with the mission of promoting balanced and responsible growth in the metro Atlanta region and Georgia. Council members include most of the top developers, builders, engineers, architects, community improvement districts, attorneys, and include such companies as Comcast, AGL, Georgia Power, Gas South, Jacoby, Pulte, and Winter, just to name a few. All of them are a major part of Georgia's economic development and job creation engine. Last year, our member companies were involved in over $1 billion of new private construction development, and our community improvement districts and public utility members contributed tens of billions of dollars in the economy with construction and service and power generation. As part of our legislative package approved by our Board of Directors, we have transportation as a top priority. The Council has engaged in the transportation discussion for many years and is a member of the board of the Georgia Transportation Alliance that Sully just spoke to. As an organization, the Council has pledged to support recommendations by the Joint Study Committee that was held this summer and to support funding mechanisms that fully fund multi-year transportation infrastructure needs. We believe that the solution to transportation funding will not be found in a silver bullet, but will take a multi-pronged approach to address the $1.5 billion critical need to maintain the state's roads, bridges, and transit systems. We need to face it. Transportation and economic development are linked, as Sully alluded to. Georgia citizens need to understand that it's going to take all of us to sacrifice a little to achieve the funding needs we have that continue to keep this state with the world's busiest airport, the fourth largest port, and the #1 place to do business repeatedly. We believe the combination of solutions proposed in House Bill 170 go a long way in meeting our state's transportation funding needs. I can commit to you that the Council, our Board of Directors, and our over 250 company members stand by to support you, the committee, when you vote affirmative on House Bill 170. If there's any questions I could answer, I'd be more than happy to, and we appreciate y'all's service to the state.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. We appreciate your comments. Excuse me. I don't see any questions. Thanks for being here. Mr. Andy Lord and Ms. June Dean would be next up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Andy Lord. I am here today on behalf of 4 organizations: the American College of Physicians, the Georgia Society of Clinical Oncology, Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies, and Georgians for a Healthy Future. First, I want to, as others have, thank the committee for your hard work. We have great sensitivity for the complex nature of this subject and for the political difficulty that comes with this subject. We want to be here today to present ourselves as a partner in working with you all and in presenting some potential other solutions that may be out there for us to consider going forward. That solution, as you will see on the handout that I've just passed out, is the consideration in this conversation of increasing the tobacco tax in Georgia. What I want to do real quickly is summarize the proposal in front of you, talk about some of the concerns that have come up with this, and talk about where we may have a mutually beneficial opportunity. So first of all, I know it is not the purview of this committee, but certainly as healthcare organizations, we want to be clear that it is our hope to impact healthcare causes first and foremost. We are healthcare organizations. Certainly the reduction in youth smoking is not the purview of this committee, but it's probably something we can all agree on. With regard to health care, as you see on your handout, we think it's important to note that last year, according to the CDC, the state spent $537 million treating tobacco-related disease. Just our Medicaid program alone was $537 million, so there's a significant amount of money at stake here. But more importantly, what I wanted to talk with you all more specifically about today was the budget and the budget implications. Our proposal is to take Georgia's tobacco tax up by $1.23 per pack. That's not a random number. The reason we picked that number is because a $1.23 increase would bring Georgia to the national average. We're not talking about being a national leader. We're talking about coming up to average. What would a $1.23 increase in our tobacco tax bring in? Conservative estimate, about $425 million. More realistically, probably about $500 million. We have requested a fiscal note. We're awaiting that, but the sample size of other states that have done this is great. It's pretty easy for us to predict the revenue. We think we'll be right around $500 million in new revenue if we were to take our tobacco tax to the national average. For quick context, Georgia currently has the 48th lowest tobacco tax in the country. We have a lot of room to grow. We are 48th out of 50. Only 18% of Georgians currently smoke or use tobacco. I think by contrast, probably 90+% of Georgia voters drive. So we have an opportunity to derive a significant amount of revenue from a much smaller part of the population and from a part of the population that is disproportionately placing a pretty significant burden on our healthcare system on the back end, as I said, about $537 million. So we believe there's a great opportunity to have significant revenue with a smaller footprint and affect and impact fewer of Georgia's families. Opponents are going to argue that a number of factors will impact this revenue source. They'll say folks are going to go across the border and buy cigarettes. They're going to say there's going to be tax evasion. There will be consumption declines. Are we building our house in sand? The answer to all those questions is yes, they are true. And they are calculated in the number on the sheet that you have in front of you. So first of all, cross-border sales, it's going to happen. But let me tell you how it's going to happen. 18% of Georgians live in a county that borders another state. 18% live in a county that borders another state. 18% of that 18% are smokers. That represents about 3% of the population. Will some of those 3% get in their car and drive across the border? Absolutely, they will. But it's not many of them, and it won't be consequential to the revenue estimate. Will smoking declines make this a declining source of revenue? Yes and no. It's a little bit counterintuitive, because if you raise the price per pack enough, it more than compensates for the consumption declines. Every state that has raised their tobacco tax has increased their revenue subsequently, despite the consumption declines. I don't think anybody here would argue that fewer people smoking is bad in general, but the notion that this money would go away with consumption declines is simply inaccurate. If you could envision a carton of cigarettes in Georgia right now, we have 37 cents per pack. So every carton, there's 10 packs in a carton. Every carton we sell is $3.70 of revenue to Georgia. If we were to increase that by $1.23 as we're proposing, that carton would be worth $16 per carton. But we know there will be consumption declines, so we calibrated that, and we took about 20% out for consumption declines, for cross-border sales, and for tax evasion. Even after accounting for cross-border tax evasion and consumption declines, this will generate up to $500 million. So what I would like to say is we want to be transparent that our primary motivation is healthcare. We do believe that our rural hospitals, our healthcare system across the state, we believe they are more important than a cheap pack of cigarettes. We believe that Medicaid provider reimbursement rates, which haven't been raised in over a decade in Georgia, are more important than a cheap pack of cigarettes. We believe our local school boards are more important than a cheap pack of cigarettes. We're 48th. We also believe that transportation solutions are more important than a cheap pack of cigarettes. And we hope that you all agree with us on that and consider this as one of the revenue options going forward. Mr. Chairman.
Constructive options. Thank you, Dr. Lord. We appreciate you being here and your presentation. Thank you so much. Appreciate the work you do. Ms. June Dean, you'll come up.
I'm only going to say that we support what Andy says. I'm June Dean with the American Lung
Step
Association.
a little closer, Ms. Dean.
I'm June Dean with the American Lung Association. We support what Andy presented, so we're not going to go over that again. But I am going to leave some information with the staff to pass to y'all about the polling we did. We did about 3 polls over the last 10, 15 years on the popularity of raising the cigarette tax in Georgia, and they're pretty consistent, so I thought we would share that information with you.
Thank you. We'll make sure everybody gets a copy of that. Are you Mr. Bailey?
Yes.
Eric, we'll be glad to hear
Eric
from you.
Bailey with the American Cancer Society. Again, like June, I'm not going to reiterate some of the points that Andy Lord made. Of course, we are in support of increasing the cigarette tax by $1.23. I will just leave the committee with this thought, is that tobacco use in the state of Georgia cost us more than the revenue it generates. It cost us in lives, it cost us in health care costs, and quite honestly, it cost us in a reputation and really being serious about preventing kids from picking up the habit, and about, quite honestly, reducing lung cancer incidence or mortality rates. When you take a look at lung cancer, it's the most preventable cancer out there, and that's to keep people from picking up the habit. So hope that this committee takes the tobacco tax into consideration as you look for different revenue streams. Thank you.
Mr. Bailey, thank you for being here. And do you have a handout also?
Yes, I do. Everything that you just stated is on these sheets.
Ms. Thompson, and I'm sorry, are you ready? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And then Mr. Robert Frey. Okay. If you're on deck, and then Neil Herring. Neil, you'll be after these folks. Ms. Thompson,
Yes,
floor is
sir.
yours.
Thank you. Chairman Roberts, Vice Chairman Clark, and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Julianne Thompson, and I am the former co-chairman of the Atlanta Tea Party. I am currently involved with several organizations and as a grassroots activist and mobilizer in the state of Georgia. I'm here today because 3 years ago, when I publicly opposed T-Splost, I promised to come to the table and be part of a solution. Even through the battles over that referendum, we all understood a dire need to address the funding of transportation. So at the end of 2014, myself and other key grassroots leaders, including Mr. Fry and some people in the overflow room right now, came forward and asked for a seat at the table, and we were welcomed and have been committed to meeting, discussing, and debating this issue and what we can all do to work together to solve it. Now, I'm not going to stand here and claim to be some sort of an expert on transportation, and I'm certainly not an expert on the budget. I think it's probably all very confusing to the vast majority of citizens. But after becoming involved in the talks, I developed an extraordinary respect for what you are all going through in this process. You are hearing from me, and you are hearing from other grassroots leaders who are encouraging you and cautioning you at the same time. You are hearing from activists who are opposed, and you are hearing from stakeholders in local governments, school boards, and most importantly, your fellow legislators. At times, we all may be saying different things, and we may have different concerns. And I can only imagine the stress that you're under on this issue, and I applaud that you have governed yourselves with dignity and diplomacy for the offices you hold. And I'm thankful that you truly desire our input and have welcomed us in these discussions. Again, I am not an expert on transportation, but I am glad that the author has adhered to the Georgia Constitution and attempted to correct mistakes being made in use of funds through the conversion to an excise tax so that these funds will be spent exclusively on roads and bridges. I am also extremely supportive of the measure to repeal the credit on electric cars and to assure that those owners are also part of a user pay system. Like I said before, I am just an activist. I call out bad legislation, and I advocate for good public policy. I can choose to always be reactionary, or I can choose to not ignore a real problem and be a proactive part of a solution. No legislation, as has been said, is perfect, including this one. But it is still in its infancy, and I expect that it will continue to evolve as it goes through the process, and many concerns will be met over time. The fact is, our roads, our bridges, our projects around the state can no longer wait, And so I strongly urge you to move forward with the Transportation Funding Act because we can no longer kick the can down the road. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for your insight. I'm sure, like most of us that drive on the roads in Georgia, it does make us somewhat of a transportation expert. So, we appreciate your comments. And
thank you, sir.
Appreciate your engagement in the process, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you,
All right,
Mr. Chairman.
We'll love to hear from you now, Mr. Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Roberts, for the bill and your bill sponsors, the people that helped you there. I want to thank all of you for working on this. I came down here for one reason from Forsyth County, and that was because the original bill that I read pointed out that the money would stay for transportation if it was an excise tax. And I thought, hallelujah, because I had fought the T-Splosh back in 2012. I wanted to point out also what Forsyth County has done with their $200 million bond revenue, because I think people that talk to you about losing money, there are ways to recoup that money and still keep money for bridges and roads. I'd love to know from Josh here if the bridge on 369 that goes over Lake Lanier, that's Browns Bridge, if that's on the list, because that bridge was modeled after the bridge that collapsed in Minnesota. And my friend who's on the DOT keeps telling me that it's not safe. Now that's third-handed information, but I drive across that bridge as well as my grandkids at least twice a day. So, and by the way, my politics go all the way back to FDR. I was 7 years old when he died. But thank you for being here, and I trust that you will come out with the right decision and right bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fryer. We appreciate your insight. And you're right. A lot of what we're talking about is about safety, and that's what helps drive this discussion and our commitment. Neil Herring, we'd be glad to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman Roberts.
Excuse me, Neil. I want to make sure we keep moving along. Dave Williams, you're on deck.
I'm speaking for the Georgia chapter of the Sierra Club. We were really excited when y'all first announced the bill about transit funding. Unfortunately, there's no money in the bill specifically dedicated to transit. There is a definition in the dedication of the local excise tax money that would include public transportation, but it's not clear that that dedication is actually constitutional. The dedication of the excise tax on motor fuel received by the state is plainly a legal dedication. But the statutory dedication to the other purposes that is in the bill may not. It may be a unconstitutional dedication. It's a problem. It would be most helpful if y'all would just go ahead and do the really heavy lift and amend the Constitution and add public transportation to the purposes that the excise tax can be used for, and we would support that wholeheartedly. We think that the $200 fee on the electric cars is a little bit heavy. It doesn't comport with what gasoline users are paying. It's a heavy gasoline user that pays that much, and I think that should be adjusted downward for that reason. And we strongly support the commitment of the initial funds to road maintenance, particularly capital maintenance, so that we can maintain the existing system. Every time you cross a state line going out of Georgia, you drive onto worse pavement, and we want to keep it that way. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments, Neil, and certainly we hear you loud and clear. And I noticed the chairman certainly understands and is working very hard to address some of those concerns. And his comments at his press conference certainly indicated his acknowledgement of the importance of transit in our state. Dave Williams, we'd love to hear from you. And Mr. Ed Crowell, you're on deck.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. My name is Dave Williams. I work at the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, and it was my pleasure to attend all 8 of the Joint Study Committee hearings throughout the state of Georgia. Our leader, CEO Hala Matamag, was a member of that committee, and she attended 6 of those meetings as well, and learned an awful lot. It was a tremendous amount of collaboration, and it was a very inclusive process. And to that, I want to commend Chairman Gooch and Chairman Roberts, who co-chaired that committee. And I thought it was very, very productive and was a fantastic foundation for this process to have as its basis. It's not a secret that we've held long that we have been underinvesting massively in our transportation network in Georgia, and we're very appreciative at the conversation that we're having now. We think this we've made enormous process. HB 170 represents a giant step in the direction that we need to be moving in, and we want to continue to urge all of the members of the House, and then hopefully not long the Senate as well, to continue to allow us to be able to upgrade, to maintain, and then also upgrade and expand our transportation networks. We do a lot of economic development work in our building, in our shop. We have a lot of partners, the state of Georgia, a number of county chambers and development authorities and so forth. And transportation is unquestionably one of the key components of being successful in the long term towards creating and adding and retaining jobs. If we don't take care of the system that we have, we won't be able to do that for long. As Governor Deal, we all heard Governor Deal state, GDOT only has the ability to resurface about 2% of our road system annually. That's a 50-year cycle, and we won't be able to keep doing that for long. So this infusion of annual recurring capital, I think, is very important. We also hope that and one of the great things that about this bill is that it provides flexibility, particularly at the local level, on the local funds for a variety of uses, added flexibility that we haven't had before. I think that's very important. But I don't envy you in your decisions. It's going to be very, very tough calls. We know that it's going to require a lot of attention and focus. You're hearing from a lot of different constituent groups. We just want to make sure that the Metro Atlanta Chamber and our members are solidly on the record supporting HB 170. We want to have the process continue to move forward. We look forward to being a resource and a partner of yours as we move forward. Thank you for your time.
Well, we appreciate your comments, Dave, and we appreciate your involvement in the study committee and certainly Haley's involvement. So we appreciate both of you. Thank you for your comments. Mr. Ed Crowell.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll try to stay inside the time limit. And I want to thank you for the record. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Ed Crowell. I'm the chairman, not the chairman, I'm the president and CEO of the Georgia Motor Trucking Association. GMTA is a voluntary trade association that is 86 years old and has approximately 1,000 Georgia-based members and about 1,100 companies overall. We are the backbone of the state's trucking industry. As such, I'm here before you representing an industry that pays roughly 1/3 of the $2.2 billion that Georgia receives annually in state and federal fuel taxes. So as you might imagine, this is an important bill for us. I won't go through the bill section by section, but do have some overarching comments and a few specific points on which I want to focus. You may think of them as one objection, one suggestion, and one solution. First, I want to thank you all for dealing with the issue. Whether we're 100% pleased with the finished product or not, the fact you're not ignoring it is worthy of acknowledgement. Kicking the proverbial can down the road would be a much more comfortable thing in many ways, but we appreciate you refusing to do that. Generally, GMTA supports this bill, especially in its main goal of ending diversion of fuel tax funds away from their constitutionally mandated role as user fees. There's nothing justifiable, nothing conservative about the current situation. Today, one group is taxed unfairly to subsidize another. People who drive cars and companies that use trucks should not pay more for schools or sidewalks, parks, or public safety than those who ride in the passenger seat or have the same income but gain it from pushing papers instead of pulling freight. HB 170 sets things right. While the bill is a tax increase, that's only true because we have let the cost of government been purchased down, bought down, or masked by letting roads suffer while we use those funds to subsidize other projects. Ending that may be painful, and paying the real cost may be painful, but it is the right thing to do. Likewise, moving toward an excise tax is a wise change. The purpose of a user fee should be to build and maintain the system being used, and the steady, more predictable stream of revenue from an excise tax makes more sense for planning than the swings and instability of sales taxes. On that note, however, GMTA does have one objection. We object to the indexing that's proffered in HB 170. Indexing is not justifiable, and as many states have discovered, it's a dangerous tool when it's used to protect tax users rather than protect taxpayers. Indexing is being presented as a long-term solution, but it's actually, again, neither conservative nor is it equitable. Taxpayers are not guaranteed additional money each year to pay for tax increases, nor is it right that future representatives of the people are not asked to make clear-eyed judgments regarding the needs of their day. There's an old truism that if you want more of something, subsidize it. Indexing subsidizes costs. It doesn't meet needs. And in doing so, it guarantees that costs will increase. We see this in areas such as college tuition, in medicine, and other states have seen it in transportation. States as famously liberal as Wisconsin and Massachusetts, which had indexing, have dropped it because no matter what the index says, the cost always exceeded that. We oppose indexing, but we realize there may be some. If there is, we would strongly then suggest it be term limited, that there be a 5-year or 10-year sunset on any indexing so that a future legislature and future governor be asked to look at the issue and decide what the need is for their time. Other than that point, we take no position on the amounts of the bill that deal with gasoline tax. We use significant amounts of gasoline, to be sure, but diesel is core to our industry, and our industry is core to all the diesel use. The overwhelming majority of excise tax diesel is used in commercial purposes, and a huge portion of that is used in interstate commerce. The bill as written, unfortunately, remains detrimental to interstate commerce. The chairman spoke briefly about the fix that's in the front and the fix that comes from creating an excise tax. That fix leaves when you allow local taxation of diesel. Now, let me be clear. Truckers do not dislike local governments, but the state participates in the International Fuel Tax Agreement, and as such, we as the trucking industry are forced to participate in the International Fuel Tax Agreement. The International Fuel Tax Agreement penalizes you if you have local taxes on diesel fuel. Okay, so this comes to our one suggestion, which is simply do not allow local tax on on-road diesel. Our solution for that is straightforward. We are willing to discuss a higher state sales tax on diesel, on on-road diesel, and then allow DOT to distribute the money as it agrees to with local governments. If we don't do that, then what we've fixed, what the chairman discussed earlier about the money that might come from fixing the IFTA problem, actually turns around and recreates itself. That penalizes truckers, it penalizes the state in income, and it penalizes all the border businesses around the state that hope to do business with us. So that's what I have. One suggestion, one objection, and one solution. Thank you again for your service and for working on this, and I'll be glad to take any questions.
Yes, sir. We have a question. Chairman has a question. Chairman Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so you actually get hurt by allowing local governments?
Absolutely. I can tell you the numbers are staggering. Hundreds of trucking companies have policies do not buy fuel inside Georgia. One of the largest trucking companies in the state with 2,200 vehicles has a penalty for their drivers if they fuel up in Georgia. And it is all because of the paperwork that's required in the International Fuel Tax Agreement. It doesn't affect cars because cars don't do that. They don't report that paperwork. I could get into the details, but your eyes would glaze over very quickly. It's incredibly arcane. But the solution is simply that we need to pay, as a trucking industry, we need to pay only state excise tax. That solves the problem. That brings in the money. And again, it's fine for DOT to distribute it later, after the fact. It's just if we're paying local, then we get into tax avoidance and all kinds of issues.
Thank you.
Interesting.
All right.
Thank you for your
Thank you all very much.
Thank you for your clarification there. We're here from Tom Gale, GMA. You'll introduce yourself, Tom. I think everyone knows you, but just to make sure and
Yes,
for
sir.
the record.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. My name's Tom Gale, and I'm with the Georgia Municipal Association, and I'm delighted to be here today. I also attended all of the 8 meetings across the state and really enjoyed getting to see city officials, local officials, and the business community talking about the need to fund transportation in the state. A lot of folks have thanked Chairman Roberts, and he certainly is doing a yeoman's lift and trying to get something done for the state's admitted needs in transportation. But I think Abby and Andrea deserve a definite round of applause for all the work that they've been doing. And of course, Councilor Rick Ruskell and his cohort at Leg Council, who've probably been burning the midnight candles. I have a few ideas that I wanted to throw out to this committee. GMA is supportive of trying to figure out a way to help the state with its admitted transportation shortfall and not only maintaining what we've got but growing for the future. And we've got a rare opportunity in this discussion to revise and improve the Plan A that we know as the Transportation Investment Act, but also to develop a Plan B for the state of Georgia. We have an idea that the Transportation Investment Act that Representative Prince and his district is very aware of. I'm trying to see if any others are in the room that are benefiting from that. Chairman Burns, I think you may have a county or two in your district. Nope. Chairman McCall does. The Transportation Investment Act that passed in these three regions is widely popular. We found that out when we visited two of those regions during the Transportation Study Committee meetings across the state. Our suggestions are basically, first of all, to allow the Transportation Investment Act roundtables to initiate another attempt at crafting viable regional project lists without having to do legislative state action. Right now, in order for them to start talking again and to bring forward another project list, they have to get a bill passed through the General Assembly, through the local legislative process, just to start that next go-around. Also, we think that the roundtables, since they are, of course, comprised of elected officials, should be able to determine the length of the term of the tax. As you all recall, every region was forced in the TIA to decide to have a 10-year time period for their tax. Why not let the roundtables make that decision? It may be appropriate for them to do a 4-year tax in a particular region or a longer tax, depending on local needs and local conditions. Allow these roundtables to set and decide on which election date to hold that referendum is best for that particular region. In Northwest Georgia, for example, there were, I think, 3 or 4 e-splosts and 2 splosts on the exact same ballot as the Transportation Investment Act. And if my recollection serves me, they were successful in those local referendum. The regional referendum failed. So let the round tables in each region decide what is the best date for them. Also, there's been a lot of talk about sub-regional configurations. I know Chairman Setzler's been very interested in talking about this for a number of years. There may be some appropriateness in looking at allowing those roundtables to come up with an idea on how to set those sub-regional configurations. Maybe you require a supermajority of the roundtable for those sub-regional configurations to coalesce. But keep that in mind if we're going to be having this opportunity to revise what we call as Plan A, the TIA. And the second idea that I think is more relevant to the proposal that's before you today in the actual text of House Bill 170 and the subcommittee substitute, we think it's important that you all consider adjusting the rate of local sales taxes if the proposal continues to call for the removal of motor fuel from the local sales tax revenue base. The taxation rate for all future splosts and losts should be structured so that if you remove this motor fuel from our local sales tax base, the rate should be adjusted to make local governments whole. If you adjust this rate, it keeps local governments it allows local governments to maintain the ability to do property tax rollbacks that they do through local option sales taxes currently. It allows the flexibility of use for spending on capital and also on M&O that we're able to use through the local option sales tax. So bottom line is we would like for this committee to consider a different approach if the proposal is going to move forward with an attempt or part of it removing from the sales tax base that portion that's collected on motor fuel. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to try to answer any questions, and I'm sure there probably aren't any.
Yeah, that was clear as mud, Tom. You did a good job on that. No, you did a really good job. Any questions for Tom? You did well.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks.
I'll be glad to talk with you or any other committee members as this bill moves forward in the process.
Absolutely. You're a resource, Tom, and I know the members know that, and we appreciate working with you and look forward to continue the conversation.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Sean Adams. Sean Adams at ACCG. You're up.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. Just wanted to start off briefly. They heard this in subcommittee, but make sure the full committee understands that transportation has been and always will be a top priority for counties in ACCG. As we move forward, our commissioners, as you may know, were originally known as Commissioners of Roads and Revenue. And as a part of that, the reason why it's so important is because counties in this state are responsible for maintaining about 70% of the road miles in the state. And as you heard earlier from Josh Wall at GDOT, a little over 8,000 of the bridges and culverts in the state are responsibility of counties. So it's a top priority. Countywide, between capital, operation, and maintenance, we spend about $1.3 billion a year in transportation now. That, I think, is an indication of what that priority is. As a byproduct of that, we were heavily engaged in the study committee process. Our executive director was one of the members of that study committee. We made sure we attended every single one. We've been deeply engaged with the sponsor and the committee as we've gone through from the bill in its original version all the way through the substitute that you saw on Monday. Since then, Monday night, our policy council, which is made up of our executive committee at ACCG as well as our chairs and vice chairs of each of our 7 standing policy committees, have since voted unanimously to support the changes in the bill that came out in the substitute on Monday afternoon. Since then, we have more and more of our counties, as they continue to be engaged in understanding what the language is in this bill does and how it could benefit them. More of them are coming out to at least understand the direction the state's going and appreciate what the state is doing and trying to ensure that we are making the most effective use of our revenues on motor fuel. And we're going to continue to do that, continue to work with the chair and the committee as we go through this process and see this bill through. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll take any questions.
Questions for Sean? Another good job. We appreciate you and the association and as well as Tom, if I didn't say so, both groups being involved in over the summer. I appreciate your continued involvement and look forward to continue working with you.
Thank you.
Hold it, Sean. For Sean?
So close.
Chairman, you almost made it, man. Chairman McCollum.
I was pretty clear that y'all supported the changes, but do you support the whole thing?
We support the bill in its current state. The changes are the part that mostly impact the local governments, and that's why we've been specific to that.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We don't want to exclude anyone from speaking. We've heard some really good comments and some ideas. We would certainly, at this point in time, we would entertain someone else to speak if there's a desire. And if I don't see anyone, I'm going to recognize Chairman Roberts to make a few comments and then see if there's any questions from committee members. Those of you that arrived maybe later than when we got started here. We will not be voting on the proposition today, so it's an informational meeting. So some more information, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and our committee members as well as those that have showed up, the rest of the members that have showed up today to hear about this issue. I appreciate all those that have spoken today and offered insight. And I want to touch back on a few brief points that was talked about. And, transportation is an economic development issue. It really depends on where you're at as far as what you see transportation to be. If you're in the metropolitan area, it's about congestion relief. It's about getting a person from point A to point B. It's about being able to get them there in a reasonable amount of time. That is about economic development, because when industries, companies start wanting to move here to the metropolitan area, they want to know, one, that they can get their end product to that final place, but they also want to know that their employees can get to and from work, and that they can get home and be able to spend time with their family and their children and participate in that, not sit in traffic for another hour and a half, or in the morning time actually be able to sit down and have breakfast with them versus having to leave an hour and a half, 2 hours before they need to because of the traffic issues. In the rural parts of the state, it's about economic development as well. It's about being able to talk to a business or industry that's coming in to create jobs and being able to tell them that we have the infrastructure here to get your product from point A to point B. So it really depends on where you're located as to what your issue is, but in the end, it is all about economic development. It's about jobs. It's about moving this state forward. I want to touch on another issue that we've talked about. Right now, currently today, GDOT's budget, 54% comes from the federal government. That means 54% of every dollar that we have in the budget at the Georgia Department of Transportation to spend on roads comes from the federal government. Well, as we know, with that, there are strings attached. There's about a 40% increased cost when a federal dollars are tied to a project, not to mention another 2 to 3 times longer to finish that project. I mean, most of you can probably go back and look at a project that's in your district that's had a federal dollar tied to it that has taken 10 years or so to complete, that could have been completed with probably a fraction of the time if there was no federal dollars tied to it with state dollars. If we successfully pass this piece of legislation, and we're looking at, depending on where our fiscal note comes back at, and I can promise you I'm ready to see it just as much as anybody else, so hopefully that'll be back to us soon. But if we're looking at $1 billion roughly, then we're probably down to about 30% of our dollars from federal government, which means we now have more dollars that will go further, that will get a project out the door quicker and get it completed, so that you and I don't hear from constituents back home in our district about a project taking 10, 15 years, or some projects that's been on the books even longer, but they haven't been able to get completed. There is no silver bullet. We've talked about that all throughout the summer. I've said it repeatedly. This is a multi-pronged approach, and that's what we're trying to get to. I wish there was a silver bullet and we could just say, here it is, this solves everything. But there's not. So we will continue to work on a multi-pronged approach. From a transit issue, I agree with Neil. In the bill, we talk about dedicating the money toward transit. We realize and understand you can't dedicate it without a constitutional amendment. We understand that. That is our intended language as for it to go there. So without a CA, we do understand that. We are looking at making a commitment within the budget. Unfortunately, within this bill, I can't tell you, or I can't put something in here for the budget. We have to wait and vote on that on the floor, but we are committed to that. I believe that it is time for the state of Georgia to step up and start putting money into transit. From Mr. Ed's comment, Ed Kroll, from indexing, not tying future legislators to this. I mean, we can always, as legislators, as long as it's not in a constitutional amendment, can go back with a 91 vote of the majority and change that. So there is ability down the road if we see that we want to change the index and do away with the index, and we always have that flexibility and all. But I do appreciate him and his organization for what they do for this state, and I appreciate the information that they've given us. With that, I will be glad to answer any other questions. If you have any that you can't think of today and want to come by my office, we will continue to listen, and we'll continue to try to make this bill as good a bill as we can. As we've said, there is no perfect bill. I understand that as much as I would like for it to be, but we will continue to try to make improvements to try to answer. I will say this, we're not going to make everybody happy. We're not going to make everybody whole, but we are working to try to get the best bill. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll answer any questions.
That was an excellent wrap-up. And you have had an open-door policy. You've been committed to that, and we appreciate that. And I think the people of this state should be appreciative of that also, that you have and you continue to listen to ideas. Chairman Ronders.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank the Association for County Commissioners and Chairman McCall for saying they support the bill as currently. There's a lot of organizations, and we were kind of talking about it, that says we like this, or whatever. I'd love to know if you actually you like the bill that we've got right now, because I don't know what that means. There's been a lot of chatter, as you know,
sure,
and fear-mongering by various groups. So I just would like personally some clarification on that, whether organizations actually support it or not as currently written. But I want to call your attention to, if I may, line 539 on page 16 as it relates to Tier 1 and Tier 2 counties.
Sure.
I've got to assume, Josh, that a bad bridge knows no tier. And that's just the kind of thing that if you're going to ask for those citizens, those communities, those people to that buy motor vehicle there, there's just a part of me that goes, how is that even relevant to the safety needs and the maintenance needs of what we're talking about? I struggle a little bit with that.
Okay.
And so help me with that.
Sure. Right now we have the Georgia Transportation Infrastructure Bank. If you go back and look from its inception 4 years ago, I think, don't hold me to that, could have been 5, somewhere around that frame time, we put this into law. Since that time, the first couple of years, there was only the money went to CIDs, which they do a great job in this state, and they've got a great purpose. After that time, we opened it up to local governments. There was only one county outside of what I would call metropolitan area. Now, Athens, some wouldn't call it metropolitan area, but I would call it in this general area. They got a grant from that bank, and that was Grady County last year. With this language, what we're trying to say is a portion of that money needs to look at going to Tier 1 and Tier 2 counties. Now, it's not just for bridges or anything. This is for any kind of local transportation projects that they might think is important in their area and need to be able to have an opportunity to go in and apply. I will say this. The part of the problem was probably the rural communities and all outside the area didn't really understand the process and the application process. They have been working with them to kind of get them up to date as to what to do. So Chris Thomas and Bert and them's done a great job over there working with them, and so hopefully that's going to change down the road. I just wanted to put some language in there that says, listen, we need to take into consideration some of these areas, other areas of the state, and that's what this language does. If we put more money into it, which is what I'd like to do, currently right now today there's about $9 million in that infrastructure bank. I would like to increase that amount. If we can get this passed, that gives us more revenue to be able to do so. That will give opportunities all around the state of Georgia to go there when they need that extra funding.
I just get a little nervous from a liability point of view for the state with what happened in, I think it was Highway 27, where we're saying preference.
Sure.
Because if everything was equal and something happened here slightly and one was a one tier to go, well, you chose it because they were Tier 1 or didn't do the maintenance.
Sure.
And I just wanted to put that on your radar screen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Geisinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, if we had a statewide sales tax of 1 cent, what would that do for us, revenue-wise?
If we use the numbers based off of the numbers when we anticipated the T-SPLOST statewide at the time, using those figures and the exemptions that were in that bill, that would generate about $1.4 billion. If you took away those exemptions, it probably generates close to $1.6 billion, was the numbers and the estimates that we had at the time.
Further question, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Actually, it's more of a statement. I have a city in my district that was concerned about the fact that the money goes to the county instead of the cities. Now, we have cities in Fulton County that are 100,000 or more. What's your comment on that?
If you're talking about the local dollars that goes back, it goes back according to LMIG, so they'll get their money. The county gets theirs, the city gets theirs. And if you look at North Fulton, probably the majority of your cities up there make out way better than they currently do. As you are aware, and most of us in this General Assembly are aware, there's only a small unincorporated area of Fulton County, and maybe by the time we finish this session, there may not be any. Who knows? With all the other bills that are out there, but That's why I think if you'll go back and look at those numbers, the cities actually make out better.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Other questions from members of the committee? Well, Chairman Roberts, I think you've pretty much covered it. And that's outstanding job and astounding that you don't have any more questions than that. So if we don't hear anything, if you'd like to come back up, or if not, we'll.
Do you want to give out those amendments? I think there's 2 amendments.
We do. Okay.
And
Yes,
let y'all talk about them.
I'm sorry. That's my mistake on that. We have some discussion on some amendments, and what we're going to do, the posture we'll take here is we'll have the amendments introduced and presented, I should say, and then we'll take them under consideration until next week. So there can be if there needs to be clarification or any work on them with the author, that will be a possibility. I think the first amendment we have is by Chairman Setzler. So we're just going to give just a minute here to do the logistics, if I may. Yes, ma'am. I need some definite instruction.
Do you want all 3 of them right now?
Let's go ahead and get started on this one, and then we'll pass the others out. We'll discuss the Setzler Amendment. That's I think, does everyone have a copy now? We might better let the author of the bill have a copy. That would probably be good. Everyone have a copy? Not yet.
Yeah, it is.
Appreciate everyone's patience. We've had a good discussion, I think, this afternoon, and we look forward to.
Yeah, I think I just got one of them, James. Thank you.
Hearing on the amendment. All right, so everyone now have a copy of the First Amendment, and we're looking at 340671. Setzler Amendment. Chairman Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For members of the committee, as we move through the process and go from concept phase to refined bill to more refined bill to a bill that's getting close to passage, one of the things I wanted to make sure we could do is, as we put meat on the bones and flesh out the details of what a transit solution could look like and should look like, that mirrors successful transit in the past for the state. As you know, when the MARTA Act was passed and approved by the counties that have MARTA now, there was a referendum vote in each of the respective counties. Recently, there's been a vote in Clayton County to bring MARTA in and expand the services there. And what this bill does is a couple things. Mirroring that same process would have no impact on expansion of or have no impact on existing transit systems that provide bus service. But for fixed guideway transit, meaning rails, light rail, BRT systems, would require there be a county vote for the implementation and expansion of fixed guideway transit outside of the core service area for MARTA. So whereas Fulton, DeKalb, Clayton County, this would not affect those specifically. But if we're going to run a rail line for transit purposes outside of those counties, that county would have a vote. The vote would be determined by the county commission, the date when that would be set, so that those dates would be set up by the commission. But this recognizes that when fixed guideway transit moves into a county, it's a long-term commitment. It's not just a one-time project. It's not building a bridge. It is a multi-year, permanent commitment for a county that extends beyond the term of a particular commissioner. Similar to general obligation bonds, where we've got to have a referendum vote of the citizens. You can't do a GO bond without going before the voters, because a 20 or 30-year bond expands beyond the term of the elected officials that are contemplating the bond, and it puts it before the voters. So in a way that's really similar to the MARTA counties opting into MARTA, to have fixed guideway transit outside of the core MARTA areas, it would simply, as Cobb County is going to be doing in 2016, is going to be contemplating fixed guideway transit putting it before the voters, allowing the vote of the folks in the 2016, in this case, our case, general election, to determine if fixed guideway transit should be expanded to our county. That's what the bill does, Mr. Chairman. Be glad to answer questions.
Have a couple of questions. Chairman Reinders.
Thank you. I just, and we don't have this down in my neck of the woods, but I just want to make sure I'm being proactive. So let's suppose for the moment we wanted to run a rail from Cobb to Rome. Are you saying that each county then has to have a separate vote to get to Rome?
This affects transit. There's a difference between passenger rail and transit. Passenger rail falls under the Federal Rail Administration and those provisions. Transit is defined separately in the code. So when you talk about transit, it deals with multiple trips a day. There's certain definitions of that. So this refers to transit expansion. So for example, if we were going to have transit from Atlanta to Cobb County and to Cherokee County, then both Cobb and Cherokee would have to vote to make that happen. Okay. If you're expanding passenger rail from Chattanooga down to Macon, for example, that's a passenger rail situation. It's not a transit.
And as you know, if I may continue, I'm a big fan of local input and local control. So could you, in essence, using your example, and you took me there, does that mean that in your scenario, a Cobb would have the right to veto a Cherokee? In other words, one county passes, but another doesn't?
If the transit service were transiting through Cobb County, servicing Cobb County, going to Cherokee, the answer is yes. If the transit were extending from Fulton County directly into Cherokee County, then the answer would be no.
So if I were doing something to Macon and one county said no?
If you're providing passenger rail service, this has no effect on Amtrak or what is otherwise passenger rail. This only deals with transit. And there would not be transit from Atlanta to Macon is unlikely. That's a passenger rail because the distance.
And it may be unlikely. I just want to make sure that one county doesn't have the power to stop the transportation wishes of another county. And I don't know if that's my only point. I don't know if this does this or not, and so we can talk about that.
For transit, again, under the definition of transit service, for transit service through a county, they would have self-determination for their county, not passenger rail.
Thank you.
Under this amendment, what you're asking is correct. From a transit standpoint.
So one county could stop or veto another county. That's my concern.
Under the transit.
If you had 3 county transit, the center county maintains self-determination of their county. That's correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Sessler. We would certainly welcome you to have a heavy rail system or some kind of a transit system in Cobb County, perhaps that would come into Atlanta. What I'm trying to figure out is what is different about, why is your amendment needed?
A couple things. There's been some discussion around, let me back up and be a little more clear. We have a transit system in Cobb County. It's called Cobb County Transit.
Right. It comes into the Arts Center in Atlanta.
We have buses that service inter-Cobb and then from Cobb into the those are flexible lines.
Right.
If one specific route's not producing, is not really serving customers well, we can redeploy those buses very easily. A fixed guideway transit, however, is different in kind.
Right.
Once it's built, it never moves. There's substantial capital dollars. And as we all know, when you've got substantial capital dollars and a permanent operational subsidy that's required, you can't look at a line that's perhaps sagging in its performance and redeploy it like you can a different bus line.
Right.
Buses are permanently flexible. Fixed guideway transit's not. And because these are multi-year commitments, the subsidies are multi-year. When you build a fixed guideway transit, you've got to provide a 20-year guaranteed revenue stream before the capital's spent. And then there's an expectation beyond that you've got something that's truly too big to fail. These are permanent commitments that, in my estimate, a single county commission shouldn't be able to bind other county commissions.
I think I agree with you. I just am wondering why you need this, but
I can probably answer that for him. It's an excise tax now locally that's not voted on. It's there and in place, and his concern is, and rightfully so, the chairman, is down the road you have a commission that goes in and says, I'm going to take these existing excise tax dollars that's already in place, and now I can take and use them for transit, albeit it's got to be a fixed rail, without the wishes of the people. Where currently, today, they would have to go in and vote. for that.
And when you look at the counties,
Because of the definition that we put in here for transportation purposes.
I see.
and when you look at counties now in the metro today, Cobb is an example. Our chairman's been talking about this with, and there's differing opinions. When you really get down to this being actionable, Cobb has recognized overwhelmingly this needs to be a referendum vote. That even though there's technically an ability to do this, that even a leadership that's friendly to this recognizes it's really bigger than them.
It's a big commitment. I don't have the objection. I'm just trying to think through what you said.
That's what we're doing.
Okay.
Figuring it out. Other questions on the Setzler amendment? Comment, Chairman?
And Mr. Chairman, I'll say one more thing too. Again, as we refine a bill and get closer and closer to something that's really actionable, there's vast opinion in my own county about this issue. But what we don't need to have is a bill that's been fixed in every other way. And as people look at something that's actionable and perhaps prepared to be acted on, and you look at the four corners of this bill and say, wait a minute, this bill allows transit to be funded coming into my county, whether our citizens want it or not. We need to stop this bill because it's got dangerous elements to it that have not been addressed. We've got to answer those questions in black and white.
She's going to take it.
And I would say, yeah, I need to. And there again, I've talked to the chairman about it, and I think he has a legit concern. And thank you, Chairman Brooks. And I think that it's a merit that needs to be discussed and all. And I hear what he's saying and understand the issue that he's faced with as well as others. And so while I don't object to the amendment, but it's up to the will of the committee, but I don't object to his amendment.
Thank you. Thank you for the amendment. And members, we do have that time frame now. We have the liberty of a little bit of time to, if you have any questions, speak to the author of the amendment, and so you can formulate.
I would also say, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to speak for an association, but I did develop the language in very, very close connection with Association of County Commissioners. I'm not going to speak for them. I'll let them speak for themselves, but it was intended to be something that would be well received locally as well. So.
I think now's the time to put that out there because it might save you talking to every one of us. Who knows? So, Chairman Roberts, are you going to talk about this?
I will discuss the other amendment that you have before you. Chairman Hamilton had some locals up today and had to meet them, ironically, at Department of Transportation. So he wasn't able to be here. This was some language that dealing with what we talked about in the last section there of the bill, dealing with the Transportation Infrastructure Bank, and he and I sat down and to work out some language that he felt like was better. It's for the committee to look at. It's just preference is given to grants and other financial assistance. In other words, he wanted to make sure that in Forsyth, where they passed that they wouldn't be excluded and they would be looked upon favorably as the money that they chose to step up at a local level and vote in favor of, that would be looked upon favorably, and I agree.
I would too. They certainly did step up. Any questions about excuse me, AM 340669? That'll be the Hamilton amendment.
Correct.
Have questions? Speak with Chairman Hamilton. One more. Representative Gardner, do you want to pass your amendment out? Is that what you? And we'll be doing that now. And as soon as we do that, we'll ask you to.
Let me just tell you why I think this is needed in the section.
Hold it just one second, Representative.
It's just one line. Well, two.
That's kind of.
Yeah, but sometimes those one-liners and one words have made some drastic changes.
Mr. Chairman, it's a simple little amendment.
Yeah, and I love you. I love you to death, but I want to make sure.
Ooh, that was a compliment. Well, this isn't exactly in the correct format, and the only amendment we're talking about is the one at the top, number 1. Some of you may know that the City of Atlanta has a municipal option sales tax, and the purpose of passing this municipal option sales tax was to pay for our sewers, which are billions of dollars, as you may know. We have been paying ourselves for correcting these sewers for quite a few years based on this most. But at the end of the most expires in 2016, and in the when we changed the date of the effect of this bill, it impacted on the ability of the City of Atlanta to reissue the most. The most is dedicated to fixing the water and sewer issues in Atlanta. So we wanted to make sure that the revenue from that particular bond would continue to be used only for water and sewer issues.
Thank you, Representative. Mr. Chairman, you have a comment?
I'm actually you're only wanting to affect most. You're not wanting to affect the whole bill as far as when it goes into effect.
No.
Correct?
No, and so the way it's written, it only impacts on the section as Section 411, which is the section on most.
Yeah, we got to go back and.
So it doesn't impact the other sections, only that one specific tax that is only collected in the City of Atlanta.
Correct. And I understand the concern there. That's a legit concern.
We have a little more work to do. It's a 100-year-old system that we're trying to make work. As you travel around, you may see some water spouting up.
I think I was here when we had to authorize that.
Pardon me?
I think I was here when we authorized that.
Yeah, I'm sure you were. It was very helpful.
That's right.
Oh my goodness!
Did you hear that? You hear what?
Thank you, Mr. Emeritus
just said
Chairman.
about you, Dean?
I expect it does have his name on it.
That is a good one.
That's pretty good.
Y'all both still look good, though. I can tell you that. There's no doubt about it. Still look good. Representative Williams, you're out of order.
So true, though. So true. I hope they say that anyway.
Let me down easy. That's what they say.
So, proper format for the next committee so that we can present it. And if anybody has any concerns, please let me know.
We will. We'll get my right and left hand. They're up, Abby and Andrea, make sure that they get that taken care of. Because
just to explain this, the second amendment was one that was trying to fix the school issues, and I understand there's some other ways to do that, and I'm happy to look at whatever options there are.
We are trying to get there, okay. Representative Gardner.
I trust your judgment.
And I actually asked her to just hold back on that amendment and to let everybody know, full disclosure, to see if we could get it worked out. So, if not, I will give you the opportunity to offer that yourself, though.
I'm not suggesting this is the best way to fix such a complicated problem. There may be several.
Thank you.
Appreciate the cooperation between the two of you. Thank you very much. Is that all, Representative?
The two of us was in the office together first.
Anyone else have a comment or an amendment or change that they're contemplating? That would be the time to let's put it out there so it be considered. We've had. We'd like to keep you involved and keep you awake. There's no doubt about that. Certainly, we've had a good meeting, Mr. Chairman. If there's anything else you'd like to bring before the committee.
I'd just say thank y'all. I know a lot of y'all could have already went home today to see your families, and I just appreciate y'all sticking around to be here today. And I hope you enjoy a great weekend, and we'll get back
next week.
Next week we'll have another hearing.
We'll have an announcement of when that meeting is. So we stand adjourned. Thank y'all.
Thank you.